All right, I'm here with Mark Poole, who is the VP of Operations from Liberty Investment Properties. Today, we're going to get into the highest impact and highest leverage things you can do when taking over a new facility. So, we'll just start with a quick intro. Mark, if you want to say hi and let everyone know what you've been up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So as John mentioned, Mark Poole with Liberty Investment Properties. We're owner operators, developers. We've been doing this for about 35 years, and I've been with the company for about 13 years, so over a decade in self-storage operations.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. Let's go into the very first step somebody should take when they're either acquiring or taking over a facility.
Yeah. Well, I would say a lot of it starts with the pre-work, right? Trying to figure out what you're buying or you're taking over on a management side, right? The more homework you can do at the front side, the better. So one of the first things I'd probably do is jump on Google and look at Google Maps, right? And kind of look at the satellite image and look at the building, look at the structure, look at the layout, all those types of things. And then once you kind of get an understanding of the market and the competitors in that, then you want to start looking at reports and trying to figure out where you can kind of start to maximize. So we also use something called a PPF method, which is like a past, present, future. So we could talk about that as well, where we kind of look at the past of the property, as much information as you can find out about the history, about how it opened, how it leased up, and then look at the present, and then that'll help you set up the opportunity for the future.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get into that method there. Is that a method that you and your team have kind of like developed after just working on all these different facilities and locations?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we've been I've probably personally been a part of about 50 or 60 locations, either through third party management or consulting or any of these things. But most of the time, I want to understand the history of the property. I think it's really important to kind of understand the unique parts of it. If you've been in the industry or you operate these things, you realize that pretty quickly that they all operate very differently, right? And even if you think you understand, each submarket is very different. The layout, the structure, the unit mix, all those things come into play.
Awesome. And in terms of when you're doing the evaluation on kind of what's the main things to focus on, how do you determine? I think you've called it like kind of like a what was it, a rate store or
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah,
Can you get into
rates. Yeah,
that's
rate
very
store or
important.
lease-up stores. So basically, we kind of simplify. So one of our things that we do here at Liberty is we like to simplify the complex. And so when you look at a storage property, there's a ton of things that you can do, right? And people want to attack a lot of different things. So first of all, we kind of have something called the Big Five. And so that's a very simple way of figuring out what is the big five things that you can do in the lens that we look at through the properties. And those big five are sales, marketing, customer service, team, and quality assurance. So that's kind of the lens that we look at the property, and then we try to determine the health of the property. How are things going in each one of those categories? And then once you figure that out, then you kind of figure out what's the state of the store. Is it a lease-up store where it's trying to capture occupancy and grow that and build income that way? Or is it a rate store? Maybe it's a store that's been established that was running, from a mom and pop or an operator that really didn't know what they were doing. Those are two different types of things. And then, if you're taking over a building and developing a brand new store from the ground up, then it feels like that's also a very different thing where there's a big emphasis on occupancy. So those are kind of like the three things that we look at, but you can pretty quickly say if the store is less than 85% or 88% or 92, whatever your kind of stabilization rate is, if it's less than that, then you need to be focused on occupancy growth and capturing a lot of the vacancy costs, which a lot of people don't, realize right away. Or you can focus on the rate store where you can improve rate by, doing rate increases and raising standard rates and those types of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like the way you kind of categorize those different things, so you could start to drill into like where should you focus, which of these
Right.
categories need the most attention. Now let's get into the lease up side a little bit. So for those stores that need the focus there, what are some of kind of the methods and tactics and things you do to actually improve that?
Yeah, so let's start with a brand new store, right? If you had a brand new store and you're doing a lease up, so there's something called pre-leasing, which a lot of people, I feel like people are starting to understand pre-leasing a little bit more. But when we first started, we leased up a store. It was our first one, or my first one, and we leased it up in about 9 months. And it was a 565 units. It was a big place. We had a lot of opportunities, a lot of advantages, but we did a really good job of making sure that we were pre-leasing the property, building the attention. So planting your flag, putting out information, putting out signs, pre-leasing is like a huge opportunity if you can do that. So I can talk more about that. But if it's just a general lease-up store, say you're at 30%, 40%, 60%, even 75% or 70, you really want to try to get to 85. So you need to 85 is kind of the minimum that I would say. And you really need to be figuring out how you can do that, right? And so the easiest thing to do is obviously look at your unit mix. And there's a report called like an occupancy statistics. It's one of my favorite reports. You can also look at a vacancy sheet, and you're really trying to say, look at the entire property and look at the high number of vacants and saying, those are the ones that we're going to go after. Those are the ones that I might be able to reduce price if I need to buy a little bit of occupancy, but that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. So if it's an occupancy, mindset that you're trying to go for, then you really need to make sure that you have the unit mix like dialed in and you've got it figured out. Like, these are the ones that we're trying to sell. These are the ones that we're pushing. These are the ones that we're putting all the attention on, and start to chip away at that slowly over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome. What about let's get into the pre-leasing, because I do get that question a lot from operators. Like, they're developing something, or and they're trying to figure out, like, do I do anything before it's fully live and ready to go? So what's kind of like your thought process and like different processes you use there?
Yeah, so I mentioned planting flag early. That's a big one, right? So get out there and let people know what's coming, right? So even if you got to put up something temporary or simple, just let people know self-storage coming soon. Put a date on there, put coming summer of, whatever. Really try to make sure that people know that self-storage is coming. And that starts to build the attention. And then over time, you want to change the flyers. You want to change the flyers, you want to change the banners, you want to change your web presence. But you want to kind of start to let people know that, hey, bring attention to this. And then slowly over time, as the building's going up and as things are going, you may want to put out balloons, you may want to put out the, different yard signs. You want to have a good high-end sign. You want to have something that's eye-catching. We did something called First 100 Customer Special, and we used this a few different times. And when we first came up with it, we're like, well, we don't really know what that is, but it sounds great, and it feels like it's kind of the sense of urgency, but you need to get on the list. If you want the First 100 Customer Special, then you need to call us or go online and register and make sure you're on that list. And so that kind of, that really prompted a lot of like attention to the property. And so, people would ask us, hey, what is this? Like, we don't know exactly, we're opening this property. As you know, with developments, they always typically take a little bit longer than you think. And so it kind of gave you a little bit of buffer room to say, hey, when we do get closer to opening this property, we want to make sure your name and your phone number and your email is on that list. And so we put a lot of attention on that. And we would have if you have multiple facilities, you might want to set up a kind of a temporary office at one of your other locations where you can field all those calls and inquiries to one setup. We've even purchased a computer before, taken it to the location that we kind of are hosting that, and we set up our managers for success. You can bonus them on the leads and start to track everything. So when they call, by the way, you would get like a burner phone or a cell phone or something like that. We used to call it the money phone. If the money phone ever rang, then you knew that lead came from a sign that you had or a flyer that you had or something. And then we would immediately pick up the phone, start to get the information, go through the sales process, and let people know, hey, we've got a brand new development coming. We're super excited about it. Make sure you get on the list, and then go from there. So we've done, the special that we did, we kind of did like, if you paid, say you open in March, it was like, if you pay for March, then you get, if you pay for March, you get all of January and February free. So we would actually kind of like promote it so that you had a 2-month kind of promotion at the beginning, but the sooner you moved in, the longer period of time that you got off. So we've done things like that, or we've done just exclusive specials on the 3rd floor or 2nd floor if you pick it or you get ahead of it. But it's a really good way to kind of get that momentum going. The only big challenge that has happened a lot with pre-leasing, and as probably someone would call out if they're watching this or listening to this, is that sometimes when people need storage, they need it now. And so that was probably the hardest part. So I get asked a lot about the timetable of when to get started. I would again say, get your flag out there as early as you can to let people know. It also prevents competitors from coming near you, and then slowly work the dial to kind of figure out, like, hey, when is an appropriate time to release pricing? When is an appropriate time to start building the list? And then the best thing you can do as well is try to get their email address or their phone and really keep them updated. Send pictures, do property tours, do walkthroughs, take pictures as the development's happening. Really start to build the excitement, because even if they do secure another location, secure their spot at a different location, they're going to have you in their mind, and they might want to come back when you finally do it.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because I've seen a lot of people put up pages on their website or other operators doing things like that, but to actually build up a list of interested people, and even if it's a percentage that actually are, by the time you're ready to go, you still have that to basically jumpstart the lease-up process without having to wait to launch ads or do other things after the fact. So I think even if you get a small percentage, you're still getting whatever the numbers are of rentals almost right away, because you have this like sort of vetted list that you built up.
Yeah, they haven't always been perfect like that, but the one that we had a huge success on was we leased it quickly, obviously, but we had 100 leases in the first 2 weeks. And so we kind of shoot for about a 10% occupancy target, within the first month. So that really helps set you up. And so it reduces some of your carry cost, and it just makes everyone feel a lot better when there's activity. Obviously, Google reviews, taking photos, like all of that is so important at the beginning. You want to come in with a big splash.
And what have you seen with promos and discounts? Is there certain ones that you've seen that perform better? Does it depend on kind of the stage the facility's at? What have you seen
Yeah,
there?
that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can cut the onion with concessions, right, or discounts. You can do short term, aggressive. You can do long term. I would say if it's a lease-up store, it's a little bit more appropriate to give a longer concession. Maybe it's a 2-month window, 3-month window, maybe up to 4-month window, because you're more than likely not going to be giving a bunch of rate increases, right away. If it's an established store, going back to like a rate store, then obviously your concession analysis is very different, and you want to be trying to figure out what's the least amount of money that you can give away to get the most. So some of the ones that we've special, kind of the one I mentioned, like you pay ahead of it with, hey, we're going to open, and as soon as we open, you can move in, but you've already prepaid a little bit, so that way you get some money that's kind of coming, and then you can kind of credit their account. That's an effective one. But also the submarket makes a difference, in the market in the area. Obviously, look at what your competitors are doing, but some people want to spend as little as they can out of their pocket. So short-term aggressive specials typically work the best, because there's a reason why Public Storage does $1 move-in. I'm sure there's a lot of science behind that. But in some cases, 25% off 4 months may be appropriate on a long, kind of tail of a lease-up store. You can do 75% off 2 months. That sounds very aggressive. But if it's a low-value unit or low-cost unit, maybe it's a 5x5 on the 3rd floor in the corner, that would be inappropriate. So not only do you want to think about the state of your store, if it's a lease-up store, if it's a rate store, but you also doing a concession analysis based on the unit types as well is also really helpful.
Yeah, let's switch gears into a rate store. So let's say you've determined it's a rate store.
Yep.
Now, how do we start that process of optimizing revenue, and what's kind of your process there?
Yeah. So if you have a rate store, same thing, pre-work. Start there, right? Look at the competition, look at the area, look at what's working in that market. You may be bringing only climate control to a market that has a lot of drive up. You can't just think that people are going to accept climate control. You kind of need to understand that market. Some people might prefer the drive up. Some people might prefer the ground floor. So those are all things that you need to take into account. But once you kind of assess your competition, obviously you want to use all the tools you possibly can, whether it's on your own or any of the vendors out there, about getting competition rates, getting that kind of stuff, and drive into that as much as you can. If it's local enough to you, I would highly encourage you to go visit the property, look at the property itself, look at the management, look who's running it. Do they have any competitors in that area? Are there REITs present? These are all things that kind of come into play. But if it is a rate store, you're generally trying to improve the rates per square foot, right? So good example of this is we had a property in Dr. Phillips in Orlando, and it was a fantastic property. It was right behind a Chick-fil-A, beautiful location, amazing. And the store was always fat and happy, making 94% occupancy, strong, feeling great. But we knew that we needed to improve rate there. So when I had first started, I was like, toying with these rate increase ideas that I'd heard other people have been doing. And we'd kind of slowly done it annually and, a little bit here and there. But when I came in, I was talking to others and learning about the process, and we very quickly pushed occupancy down to 85%, but we were making the same amount of money as we were when we were 94%. So the goal there is that if you can squeeze it down over time by giving rate increases and working through that, then that level sets you to go back and build it again. The second example I would say is we brought a property in Kentucky, and it was 100% full. It had a 17-person waiting list. That's one where we start to salivate. We get very excited because we know that there's a big opportunity there and there's a big management maybe issue. And so at the same thing, the goal there was, hey, they didn't have insurance. They weren't offering that, or they didn't make it a requirement of the lease. Well, that's low-hanging fruit. That's something that you can immediately put on 400 or 500 units, whatever it was at the time. You can also, raise the standard rates because we knew that they weren't raising their rates appropriately. Start to do rate increases, but maybe after a few months, once you kind of get into the property, meet the customers and kind of do the things that are probably deferred and things like that. So those are the kind of things that you can focus on. And then beyond that is just like looking for opportunities. Like we added parking, so we've done that at several properties where you see a little bit of space where you're like, hey, maybe we can put some parking in there until, see if we can get away with it or see if we can do some value adds. And so Those are the types of things that you want to be doing there. But at that particular store as well, waiting lists really should not exist in self-storage. It kind of means that you're not managing your rates really well. And so when we saw that, it was a big opportunity. But same thing, we followed the playbook, push occupancy down because you start to demand a higher rate. You implement insurance, that's going to push out some people naturally. So there's just some things like that that really need to happen. But then you just need to kind of get on a unit level as well, because I'm talking about rates per square foot in general. But if you go to the unit level, like a 10 by 10 or 10 by 15, each one of those units has its own rate per square foot, right? And so you want to kind of compare and contrast of how you can squeeze every little penny. And just to give you a, kind of a figure, but if you have 100,000 square feet, usually if every penny you earn is about $1,000 if it was $100,000 income. So there's some play that you can do, but you can actually determine and calculate if I go from $1.50 on rents to $1.51, how much more income is that going to make me? And then when you start to multiply that by 12 and annualize that, then obviously it adds up pretty quickly.
Yeah, and what are some tools and software you kind of use to help with a lot of those processes? Is there anything like kind of go-to things you use, or do you do some of it manually? How do you work that?
Yeah, I'd say when it comes to all this stuff, a lot of it is art and science, right? There's definitely a lot of tools that you can do. I would highly recommend, obviously, looking at revenue management systems. I mean, I think today is kind of a no-brainer not to use them. Of course, you can calculate it. Of course, you can kind of go manually. A lot of property management softwares now have it built in. There's some outside ones that you can do, but we invested in that, our time and our money, to focus on that with another vendor, and that was extremely helpful for us because if you start to run multiple facilities, then it's a scale issue, right? There's only so much that you can do per day, and so the tools are really helpful to do that. But then there's also there's the art side of it, where if you know that market, if you've owned that property for several years, you've got a good understanding of that market. Like again, going back to the past, present, future, you're living through that, and you can say, hey, we tried this, we did this. Maybe conversions is something that you need to try, right? Like there's all sorts of little things that you can do, but it doesn't fall on just one thing. I don't think there's one vendor out there. But I would say, again, this is a friendly industry, just like we're talking about this and sharing kind of topics and stuff like that. A lot of benefit also comes from just talking to others, right? Like, tell me about your Lease-Up store. Tell me about your rate store. What were some of the strategies that you tried? And over the years, you start to pick up little things here and there that just make sense. And you're like, maybe I should try that here. Maybe that property, could try this. And those things really help. So that's I think, the biggest thing. We just hired a new operations coordinator that's working with us. And, I told him, I said, at the end of the day, all we have to do is make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can. Like thinking about how can we maximize, how can we build efficiencies. And as long as we're trying every single day to figure out all the levers that can be pulled, all the strategies that can be tried, those are all the things that you can do. But you have to continually think through, how can I make this property more efficient? How can I make it better income? How can I build cash flow? And everything helps, and expenses is a big part of that. Managing cash flow, all that stuff. So I think that's often what we do as well. I would say if we get stuck, the best thing that you can do is go back and say, if we were going to start this property from today, if we were taking this up, for third-party management or something like that, what would we be doing? And sometimes it requires a re-grand opening, right? So, hey, we did a terrible job introducing ourselves to our market or to our neighbors, and maybe we need to go rethink that. Maybe we need to go reintroduce ourselves and say, hey, we did a terrible job. Let's reintroduce ourselves. How can we help you? How can we serve you? How can we help the community? What are the things that we've deferred on the maintenance standpoint that need to be addressed? What are all these things that are going to help to improve the overall efficiency of the property? And again, if you're looking for categories, the big five is a great way to start it because, again, it's sales, marketing, quality assurance, customer, and team. If you can fix those things and you can be winning in all five of those categories, then there's a high chance that you're going to be successful.
And you touched on a bit costs and kind of streamlining things a little bit there. We've talked about, kind of maximizing revenue, doing some strategies where you could increase. At what point do you start looking at reducing costs and looking for more efficiencies? And kind of once you determine you need to do that, what are the kind of steps you take to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can do that. The big thing that a lot of people talk about is remote management, unmanned, right? I think there's a big perception that you can just cut out the manager and you can throw in a kiosk and you could win. That's not necessarily the case. The case is that, that we believe, and we have for, again, 35 years, that the person behind the other side of that counter makes the biggest difference, right? And so how you get that customer to that person is very different. Some may use a kiosk. Some may use virtual management. Some may be traditional where you're running it with a person behind the counter. So those are all things that kind of come into play. But a lot of times people want to just rip out the manager and say, hey, let's just throw a kiosk in there. I don't necessarily recommend that. I think it's a hard decision to make that call. We have a lot of properties that run unmanned or remote or virtual. And, there's wins in that, there's losses in that. We have a handful of properties right now that run traditional, and there's wins in there and there's losses in that. So we have a smaller property and we're on the edge of saying, hey, how can we cut cost here? And some of that's employees, some of that's other stuff or efficiencies. But we still don't necessarily want to rip out that manager entirely. So I think there's a hybrid model. I think there's hub and spoke models that a lot of people do. So there's no one single answer. I wouldn't just go off the belief that like you can go unmanned and save a bunch of money. But the rest of the stuff obviously is just, the low hanging fruit. Look around, there's wasteful spending. Did the owner, add expenses in there that you're handling or doing personally? Is there cost of goods that you could do, vendors obviously that you can kind of squeeze. But I've always been on the front side of it with more of like, let's look for income opportunities, right? Let's not try to jump in and cut expenses, especially if you're coming into a new property as a third party management. You want to come in kind of softly and say, hey, we're changing hands, we're buying the property. If you're buying it from a mom and pop, maybe there's legacy there. Maybe they want to make sure that they've done things this way for a long time and you want to honor some of that to some degree. So it's just a matter of kind of working through all that and trying to figure out where's an appropriate way to cut expenses, but not just go in and say, well, if I cut this out, it's automatically going to save me a bunch of money. It could cause you problems.
Yeah, I love the point you had on the art and science to it, how everyone wants there to be one metric or one tactic that you just do every time and it works, but you kind of have built up this tool belt almost of all these different strategies you can use, and then it's figuring out when to apply each one or kind of testing the ones that are going to work rather than doing maybe the exact same thing every single time for every location.
Right. Yep. Yeah, we're working on some stuff now. We launched consulting last year, so we've been doing a lot of work there. But it's kind of this idea of if this, then try this, right? Like it doesn't mean it's going to work. It just means try this, right? So it's just kind of this whole series of like, well, if this is happening and your occupancy's here, or you're working on rate, or you have a problem with expenses, if this, try this, and just kind of you got to keep throwing stuff at the wall. I've tried stuff at one store and it didn't work at all, and then we tried it at another store and it was unbelievable. And you're like, okay, well, this is this is strange, but there's just things that you got to see. You have to be extremely creative, which I love about this industry. I think it's one of the, I have such an amazing job where I get to come in and say, how can we build this and make it better? How can we build efficiency? How can we, improve the customer experience? And again, going back to that big five, it's the health of the store is based on that, right? So if QAR, which again we call quality assurance review, if that's not great, that's terrible, right? You can have all the right pricing, you can have all that, you can even have a great team member there or an employee there, but if you continually defer maintenance and people have trouble with one part of the facility and you don't do anything about it, then that could be the issue, right? So you just have to really look at it. So I always encourage as well, just friends and family, if you're doing it personally, or if you've got people in town that can go do it. So we're constantly, doesn't matter who we hire within our organization, we're constantly saying, hey, go take a look at our properties, drop in, pop in, call, send your family, friends. What do you see that we're doing weird? What do you see that we could be doing better? And just because we've done it this way doesn't mean that's the way that we do it. That's a big bad habit of the industry, is that we've always done it this way, and that's just the common theme, and we definitely push against that.
Yeah, it's easy to fall in that trap where you start to forget why you're doing certain things. It's just like, it's just how it gets done. So you touched on the consulting a little bit. Before we sign off here, I want to get into that a little bit. So how does that work? Who are you kind of working with? Is there certain types of operators you're helping with that consulting, and kind of how does all that work?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Yeah, we kind of, there's two different ways. There's feasibility studies, which obviously a lot of people do. And so we do that through the lens of what we would do. I have 35 years of experience. We've done multi-story Class A facilities. We've done drive up. We've done all sorts of things, big properties, small. But we really look at it through a critical eye of what would we do. So we take it to the account of, we would actually determine the unit mix. We would lay out the property. We'd mock up the property as best as we can. So we can really cater that. But more importantly, I think the one that I kind of specialize in is there's a lot of people that teach and speak about why this is a great investment and why, self-storage is a cool, investment vehicle, and it's exciting and recession resistant and all those types of things. Then there's folks that kind of teach about how to do a payment and how to take a lease and kind of the basic manager training. I think there's a middle ground issue, right? Where there's DMs and owners and operators that maybe have 5, 10, 15, 25 facilities that just need a little extra help, right? They may not need third-party management. They're trying to figure out efficiencies. But that's a big area where I don't think there's a lot of training. I just haven't seen it. And so I've been putting a lot of time into that. When I came in, I jumped into 9 facilities and I had no storage experience. I was from the car business. So I asked a lot of questions. And so over a decade later, I feel like that was a big area where I'm like, if I had someone there to train me as a new kind of DM or regional manager coming in, and I just didn't have that. So I had a couple people, but I really locked arms with other operators. And today I have a large group of operators that I speak to quarterly just to actually compare ideas and contrast ideas. So there's a bit of teamwork that gets involved with that, but there just wasn't a big official kind of training setup. So that's an area where consulting I thought would be a great idea. So we've definitely helped a lot of groups, big and small, whether it's a single owner that's interested to learn how to read the reports better, or if it's just a DN that's new that they don't have a training program and they need kind of a crash course quickly. So, but yeah, we just started that about a year and a half ago, and so we've been slowly kind of getting the word out. So.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a huge need for that too. Just the ability to learn from someone who's kind of done what you're trying to do, because a lot of times we don't even know what questions to even ask.
Right.
So there's part of that is like, okay, maybe we're stuck on something, we need to come to you to ask something, but you could even guide someone on like, here's things you're not even going to be able to see yet because you just haven't been through it. So I think there's a huge need for that, and kind of the community aspect you have too of the sharing ideas as well.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's is going to help out a lot of people. So I'm excited to see how you progress that.
Yeah, I would say if you're not involved in the industry and you have not gotten involved, I mean, it is a very friendly industry. All you have to do is go to a show, and it doesn't matter, state show, national show, all those things are helpful. So over the years, we've gotten extremely involved. We've been doing it for a long time, but relational capital is huge. And so the more you network, the more you get to know people, the better you understand your properties, their properties, you can work together and raise all ships. So it's a great way to go.
Definitely. And how do people find you, Mark? What's the best place to go to reach out?
Yeah, so I try to post on LinkedIn. I kind of share some stuff there, so you can reach out on LinkedIn. But Liberty Investment Properties, our website is libertyprop.com. And so you can find more information about that there. And we offer anything from, development, property ownership, third-party management. We've done a little bit of everything, and obviously consulting. So you can reach out anytime.
Awesome. We'll have the links to all that too below in the description. So awesome, Mark. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
No problem.